So I'd like to thank Bradley Bean from Idaho Office of Information Technology Services. I'd like to thank him for doing this presentation, URL parameters for data in Experience Builder and Dashboard. Turn the floor over to you, Bradley. Just go ahead and unmute, and I will put myself on mute.
Sounds great. Thanks, Keith. All right. He already introduced me, so I don't have to do this little portion I wrote down about who I am. Um, who I also am, I am not an expert in any way on URL parameters. However, I am a person who has, through some trial and error, become experienced with them in a very narrow view. So it's really interesting stuff. I was excited to learn how to do some of it. It met some needs for a project that I was working on, and I thought it was something that was valuable to share with the GIS community here in Idaho. The project that I was working on that inspired this was one where we needed different views of an experience to go to basically every different state agency. The way it had been done previously was that last year there were like 55 different experience builder applications created via cloning. And then once they were published, there was no real way to change the contents of those. So working through a lot of different ways to do that, we ran into a lot of roadblocks for specific needs for what this project needed. We finally found this way to do it. So here we go. I'm going to kill my video since I'm sharing here, and we will move through a few slides, but mostly we're going to be looking at how I was able to use URL parameters to help filter some data in Experience Builder and dashboards. So I will move on to slide number 2 if this screen wants to do it. This is just a couple. These are two different URLs where Esri has been kind enough to talk about using URL parameters. First thing to notice is that depending on whether you're using ArcGIS Online or Enterprise and you pick your version, you're going to get a little bit of a different experience. Obviously, ArcGIS Online and the most recent version of Enterprise are going to have the most features in the majority of cases. We are still on 11.3, which is why I have that selected. So if you scroll through here, this is the Experience Builder page. The other one, which we'll click on in a minute, is the Dashboards page for this Experience Builder page. It has many different things that you can control with URL parameter. I guess I should have mentioned that first. The URL parameter is a way through your URL bar up here that you can pass data such as, do I want data filtered differently? Do I want a different map view? Do I want to see something specific to a person as I load an experience or a dashboard? So we'll go on to see what that looks like, but it's something that you can pass through just by giving someone a different URL. They can see a completely different view than another person. That can switch locale, which does things with the language. Obviously haven't touched that. You can define, you can go to specific pages. The one we're going to focus on today is a data related parameter, which is called filtered data sources. So that's what that looks like there. The other link that I included in the presentation there is a similar document, but this one is for dashboards. Again, you still have your selection of what version of ArcGIS Online or Enterprise you are, and it will give you all the different information about this. All right, so let's set the stage for this. Set the groundwork here. This is the type of data table that I started with. Obviously, this is made up information, but you can see we have a first name and last name. We have an employee ID number. We have a project names, project costs, and it is better. It is not required, and my current tables in my actual project don't have XY data, but we have run into a few little issues because Esri loves spatial data, and even though they want you to use it for non-spatial data, which we are doing, there are some queries and things like that even if they don't require spatial information, it still looks for that when it tries to filter things. So if possible, and if you have spatial data, include an XY field and let it add it as a feature layer instead of just a data table. So we have this. So we have published this table, and I'll show you that here. switch back to here. Got a message there, and can I move this? There we go. All right, so if I go to my portal here, I've got my data, my feature layer that's been published here. And if we go back actually first, you can see I published it by doing a new item. This was from an Excel table. All I did was select for my device, choose my Excel table. There's no specific setup that you need to do here. So whatever data you need in your Excel table, it will walk you through that. And it'll give you a feature layer. If you have XY data, it will be a hosted feature layer. Otherwise, it will be a hosted table. So you can see I've got my data here. It included an extra column because user error. Um, Something that'll come up a little bit later, if you see, unfortunately, my employee ID as part of how Portal decides to do it, has given itself an automatic comma, which for the most part for Experience Builder is not going to matter. But when we start to connect to our dashboard, we will see that that is an issue. So we will do that in a second. So you can see the data here, and then let's look at the Experience Builder that I have set up. So I've adapted what my actual application for the use here. We've got some dynamic text up top that's going to show us the first and last name of the person based off that data table. The project dashboard is not dynamic. I left a home tab here where we have a quick map of where these projects fall based off that XY data. We have the number of assigned projects, which is also going to be dynamic. If you go here, we've got some dynamic content that just means it's going to, as we filter the data source, those have the opportunity to change because they're looking at that data table to provide a value. Same thing here, the sum of involved project costs is the sum of all the projects that were assigned. Here in the next tab here, we've got our projects. So this projects tab is an embed widget, which is looking at a dashboard. Right now, we have no projects found for employee because we are not actually connected. I wanted to show that in real time. And then the last thing we have here is a data downloads tab. Anything that you filter through a URL filter, if it's filtering based off content, if it's filtering based off an employee in this case, it will also filter anything that you download. So this is a table widget. This is a little trick that I had to use due to some limitations without XY data. I would not have had to do it this way if I had XY data in all my tables. But this is technically a table, but I have shrunk that down because I only want it to be a download function. So if I download data after passing a URL data filter, it's only going to show filtered data to that person downloading. So that is what we are working with. And now we will move to the dashboard here. It's a pretty simple dashboard. This one only has one table in it here. We've got project assigned to employee, and we have the project names, and we have project cost. If you see right now, this is not filtered by any employee. So we have multiples. So we have map metrics, more than once in situations, and there's a lot of different things on here. What we need to set up for our URL parameters in our experience builder to pass through to our dashboard, we need to come over here to the view tab, and we need to set up our URL parameters. I've set up two for the purposes of this. So I set up an emp ID, so employee ID. You can name this whatever you want. You just have to reference it, which you'll see when we move to the experience builder. That is a number field. So we set it up as a number, and we set it up to filter the only table we have in here. If you wanted it to filter multiple things, obviously you'd check those and set your target field, which in this case we set to employee ID. I also set one for first name. Set that as a string, and that's filtering based off first name. So when you add them in here, it lets you reference them in our embed widget, which we will look at a little bit later. But those are important to have set up. Otherwise, it will not, your embed will not filter this. All right, so we will move to how that actually works. So if we look here, and we'll go to our projects tab where our embed is. and click here. I'm actually going to erase here. So when your URL will normally end here. We are adding a hashtag and then whatever we set as our variable in the dashboard, which in this case is imp ID. And then we're going to do an equals, and then we'll connect to our data, which I already have. You would do that by selecting the data and then selecting the sheet in that table that you want to connect to. I'll click back in here, and then I can go here. It's important to change from selected features unless you only want it to be selected features back to default. And then since we're looking at employee ID, I'll click employee ID. Now, I had some excellent help from people at Esri when I was trying to figure this out, and it turns out if you make any sort of change to your data source or anything at all, even if the names are exactly the same, you do have to redo this because this text at the end is very, very much pointed at a data source directly. So if you do change your data source, update it, anything like that, you do need to get rid of this and then make sure you're connected to the right data source. Again, change that from selected to default and then select it again. At that point, it will work properly for you. All right. My order was a little bit off here, but so we have connected that and we will look at that in 1 second. So now, basically what this does is any data source filtering we do in our URL for our experience builder will now be able to pass on, if we're filtering off that employee ID field, that will pass on to our dashboard. So let's look at the URLs themselves at this point. I think we're going to go, showed that one, showed that one. All right, so setting up distinct URLs in Excel. So before I show the Excel table itself, this is just a snippet of what that looks like, but I'll show the formula a little bit better. We have to talk about in that Esri help page for URL parameters, it does talk about unsafe characters. So when we're doing our data filtering, if in our variables or anything we have these characters, a space, hashtag, percentage, and on, we cannot actually use those. Those are unsafe for the URL var because they mean different things to the URL. So we use an encoded value instead. I will show the Excel table here and we will talk about that. So we've got our URL parameters list here. So I set this up as a way to auto-generate a custom URL based off someone's employee ID. The Experience Builder item ID you can find in the URL of your Experience Builder. It would be right here. So you can copy that. I copied that, and my formula here concatenates the URL of my portal, the experience, and then it puts in D3, which for me is the Experience Builder item ID. And then I also have it set up to pull data filter, and we'll look at identifying data sources in 1 second. But right now, it's data filtering this data source. So before we move on to the rest of that, how do we find a data source? This data source is the item that you're running that you're trying to filter off of. So on the data tab here, you can see I currently have 2 data sources. But if you have more than 2, it's important to figure out which number of data source you need to filter in your URL. The way to do that is with, I think I had it linked somewhere else, but we'll grab it here, the ArcGIS Online Assistant. The ArcGIS Online Assistant, I'm using Portal right now, so I will use this. And I think if I was smart enough, I threw my Portal URL here. Let's see. Apologies. Well, I'll just grab it from this then. I thought I had saved that somewhere else so I can make this easier. The ArcGIS Online Assistant, anytime you like navigate away from it, it's going to make you log in again. It's very finicky, but that's probably to keep our data safe. So we'll go data, and that's our username here, and I won't tell you the password. That would seem like a bad idea. See if I got it right there. So when we go here, this will be the folder structure of your portal if you're using Enterprise or ArcGIS Online. So I've saved my item to the root. And right here we have I want to. And what I want to do right now is view an item's JSON. So here we have our web experience URL parameters presentation. So I'll click on that. If you have not published your experience, this will not work. So you will need to publish your experience first. We're going to come down to here where it says copy JSON. And then we can get ourselves a notepad. This is the way I prefer to do it, but you can find this however you want. And then if you do Control F, you can search for data source. I believe all one word. There we go. And what we're looking for is, let's see, I think up a little bit from here. So we're looking for here. So we've got our list right here of data sources. Data source one is our feature service, our URL parameters data table. That's what we want. Our second data source in this experience was our web map. We're not looking at that right now. And what we need is that ID. So again, we have two real data sources. This is easy to do for this. My other project, I have about 57. So finding the name of that data source, you can also search for the name of the table if you know it, and that can help you find that data source number easier. So data source one, we know from using this method. So now we can go back to our Excel parameters list here. So we know the data source one is the data source we want to use. And in this case, we're looking at employee ID, that's the field name. And then I have it set to go to C3, which is the employee ID, which gives us our URL that we can then copy and paste. So right here we have Andrew Alsop. So let's go ahead and go to the URL and see what happens when we paste this in. So we have it pull automatically Andrew Alsop. He has 3 assigned projects, and the sum total of the projects he's involved in is just over $1 million. If I go to the projects tab, there's no projects found. Well, we know that's false. So that's going to come back to what I mentioned before. Why didn't this work? Well, this didn't work because even though our original data has no commas and we just have a 6-digit employee ID, it is adding a comma when it is trying to pass to the experience builder. There's a few ways we can get around this. You can format, when you publish your table to ArcGIS Online or Portal, you can format it so that that field is a string instead of a number column. That gets around this. The other way that you can do that is to use something that doesn't involve numbers, which in this case I set up ahead of time. So what we will do is we will go back to here, and instead of emp ID, we're going to check that other URL parameter that I put in place, which is first name. So if I go back to here and I change this whole section here to first name equals, again, don't forget to change that away, otherwise you'll be real confused, and we'll do first name. You can see that it did it there, but we'll actually go to a different URL to load that. So we will save and publish, so that way we know what we're doing here. We'll go back to that parameters list. Nicola here will be our next thing. So I did a second column here for the same type of function, but I'm pulling first name instead of employee ID. So we will copy this URL with our parameters in it, and it will pull up Nicola, who's involved in 4 projects at that price. And if I go to projects, you'll see that we have now passed on the information, and this is filtering based off this person's information. They're involved in these 4 projects. That's the project costs. If we were to download this data, we would only download the information for Nicola. So if we look at the details of all of the coding type thing in the URL parameters are on that sheet, that link from Esri, but we can look at it real fast. So what we're looking at, oh, I can't see it there. I'm going to go back to here. So if you look at the URL here, we're passing our portal information, getting into Experience Builder. We're passing that Experience Builder ID. And then we're tacking on an and sign data underscore filter equals, and then you identify your data source, and then you put a colon, you identify your employee ID. If it's a number, then this is where we get into that dangerous text. So we use a %3D, which I believe, if we go back to here, our %3D is an equal sign. So where that starts to matter is after you've identified your data source, you start needing to substitute encoded values for the unsafe characters. So that is our equal sign. And then we're passing C3, which is just a number. However, if we pass text like we are for first name here, we need to surround it with quotes. Well, quotes are also an unsafe character. So the safe encoded value for a quote or a single quote sign is %27, which you'll need before and after your identified value. So that's what it looks like. And then you can see if we copy and paste, let's just do another one real fast here. I copy this and paste it here. If we look at it, we've identified our item number for our experience builder, and we are adding a data filter for data source 1. We're looking in the first name values. We have %3D for equals, %27 for a quotation, Anthony, and then %27 for our close quotation. And if I click that, we're going to find Anthony McDonald's. We're going to see his information here, and that is how that will work. So that is one of a few known issues that I have run into. I think I've discussed the other one. So one is that to view that JSON, you must have your experience builder published. The comma issue, where if we're using numbers, the pass through to experience builder does not work properly, so that probably needs to be a string field. It's been identified by Esri and may be fixed in a future publication. Could even be fixed in 11.5 for enterprise. I do not know. I don't have access to test that. The last issue that's also been identified to our Esri representatives, when you have something like this, where we are filtering with by URL parameters, and watch, it's going to work on this where it doesn't on mine. But if I refresh this page, it doesn't always refresh properly. It looks like it might be here, so maybe that's something specific to what I'm working with so many different data sources. But sometimes the refresh button doesn't actually refresh all of these properly. Now, my URL parameters for my projects, it's a pretty long list. I think the URL parameter is like 500 characters or something like that. So we're passing a lot of information there, whereas this is just passing one. But there can be an issue with refresh. Let's go back to this here. We talked about the ArcGIS Online Assistant. And there are many other URL parameters to work with. Just to harken back to what we looked at with that first page, we can go to a specific page. You can change a map that's shown in a map widget. You can change views. You can see a print preview version of the page that you're sending somebody or the experience you're sending somebody. You can view saved draft versions. So if something's not published, but it is saved as a draft, you can send that to someone to review just by tacking on the right URL parameters for them to see the draft version. And you can keep your original version in publication if you have that open to the public or members of your agency without actually editing that. You can select data, change map scale, choose which layers are visible when someone loads something. So you could customize that much like I did in the Excel. If you want different people to have a different, basically, home page map show up when they go to something, you can configure it that way, etc. There's like 10 or 12 different options on the experience builder page, and there are a lot of URL parameters you can work with in the dashboards page as well. I do want to give a special thanks to Scott Moore and Chris Marsh with Esri. They really helped me through the process of working through these bugs that came up, as well as figuring out a method that this would work for our specific application. And I appreciate you attending the presentation, and I am available for questions.